What if your doctor told you your headache was caused by a demon? In ancient times, illness wasn't just about germs. It was a battle against evil spirits. From skull-drilling trephination to exorcisms that could last for days, our ancestors had some truly bizarre ideas about curing sickness. Today, we're diving into the strangest medical beliefs in history, where leeches were the least of your worries. By the end of this, you'll be thanking modern science that your doctor doesn't blame your fever on angry ancestors or unbalanced humors. For thousands of years, people didn't see sickness the way we do today. When you coughed or ran a fever, they didn't think about viruses or bacteria. They believed supernatural forces were at work. The ancient Babylonians left us the earliest records of this thinking. Their medical texts describe illnesses as punishments from angry gods or attacks by demons. These weren't just occasional superstitions, but deeply held beliefs that shaped entire healthcare systems. In ancient Mesopotamia, priests functioned as doctors. They would examine patients while looking for signs of spiritual attacks. A twitching limb or sudden pain might mean a demon had taken hold. The treatment wasn't medicine as we know it, but complex rituals involving incantation, charms, and sacrifices. Clay tablets from 2000 BCE list dozens of demon names believed to cause specific illnesses. Pazuzu, the infamous demon king, was thought to bring fevers and seizures. Egyptian medicine blended spiritual and practical treatments in surprising ways. Their medical papyri describe physical remedies alongside spells to drive out disease-causing spirits. The Ebers Papyrus, written around 1550 BCE, contains both herbal recipes and incantations to heal stomach pains, believed caused by hostile ghosts. Egyptian doctors might prescribe honey for a sore throat, while also reciting prayers to ward off malicious spirits. Hebrew tradition carried similar ideas. The Old Testament contains multiple references to illnesses sent as divine punishment. When King Jeroboam's hand withered after he threatened a prophet, it wasn't seen as a neurological condition, but a direct consequence of challenging God's messenger. The Book of Psalms mentions sickness being relieved when His word healed them, rather than through medical treatment. Greek medicine took a slightly more scientific approach, but still kept one foot in the supernatural world. The famous physician Hippocrates did argue for natural causes of disease, yet even he acknowledged that some conditions seemed to require divine intervention. The Asclepian healing temples became famous for their dream therapy sessions, where patients slept in sacred spaces, hoping the god Asclepius would visit them with cures. Mental illnesses particularly fell under the spiritual explanation model. What we'd now diagnose as epilepsy, schizophrenia, or depression were uniformly seen as possession. The New Testament story of Jesus casting demons into a herd of pigs shows how common this belief was. Ancient Romans would perform exorcisms by beating or starving afflicted individuals to drive out evil spirits. These practices didn't disappear with the ancient world. Medieval Christian churches maintained the tradition of treating illness as spiritual warfare. Records from the 15th century show priests performing exorcisms for everything from paralysis to infertility. The Catholic Church developed an entire system for identifying demonic possession, complete with checklists of symptoms like speaking in unknown languages or displaying unnatural strength. Jewish communities had their own traditions. The Dybbuk, a malicious possessing spirit, featured prominently in Eastern European folk medicine. Rabbis would perform exorcisms involving prayer, amulets, and sometimes even public ceremonies to shame the spirit into leaving. Some of these customs continued into the early 20th century in rural areas. Islamic medicine somewhat bridged the gap between spiritual and physical explanations. While the Quran speaks of illness coming from Allah, medieval Islamic physicians like Al-Razi also advocated for evidence-based treatment. This created an interesting blend where doctors might prescribe herbal remedies while also recommending recitation of certain verses. Mental illnesses still often fell under spiritual treatments though, with exorcisms remaining common. The belief in demonic causes lingered surprisingly late in Western medicine. As recently as the 19th century, some European doctors documented cases of demonic possession they believed explained mental disorders. The famous neurologist Jean-Martin Charcot kept detailed records of patients he believed showed signs of supernatural affliction, blending early psychology with ancient spiritual ideas. This supernatural view of illness didn't vanish suddenly. It coexisted with emerging scientific medicine for centuries. Even after germ theory became accepted in the late 1800s, rural communities continued treating some conditions through spiritual means. The switch to purely physical explanations represents one of medicine's biggest philosophical shifts. We stopped blaming fever on angry spirits and started looking through microscopes instead. Understanding these beliefs helps explain why early medical practices seem so strange today. When you think demons cause disease, trephination or exorcisms make perfect sense. These weren't ignorant people. They developed logical systems based on the knowledge available. Their treatments simply reflected different fundamental assumptions about how the world worked. Some remnants of these beliefs persist in modern times. Certain religious groups still practice faith healing, and cultural attitudes toward mental illness sometimes echo older spiritual concepts. Even the word influenza comes from the Italian for influence, reflecting the medieval belief that illnesses resulted from astrological influences. The move away from spiritual explanations opened space for scientific medicine to develop. But this transition happened slowly, with plenty of resistance along the way. For many conditions, especially mental health issues, the shift took centuries to complete. Some might argue aspects of it still continue today as we improve our understanding of the mind-body connection. This explains why ancient medical texts can seem so confusing. They're blending what we'd consider separate spiritual and medical concerns. A healer might prescribe a poultice while also telling you to avoid certain unlucky actions. They weren't just treating the body, but the whole person in their spiritual context. Next time you take an aspirin for a headache, consider how revolutionary the idea of purely physical causes really was. The notion that your pain comes from chemical processes rather than angry spirits represents centuries of slow progress in medical thinking. Yet in some ways, modern medicine still struggles with this balance. We've just replaced spirits with stress hormones and neurotransmitters. The idea of illness as spiritual attack shaped human culture for millennia. It influenced how societies viewed sufferers, how they structured healthcare, and even how they imagined the supernatural world. Understanding this helps explain why bizarre historical treatments seem perfectly reasonable to those using them. They fit within a coherent worldview that simply operated on different principles than ours. When we look at skull drilling or demon casting rituals now, they seem horrifying. But viewed through the lens of their time, they represent logical applications of widely accepted theories. That's what makes studying medical history so fascinating. It shows how even fundamental concepts like what makes people sick have changed radically over time. The relationship between spiritual beliefs and medical practice never completely disappeared either. Many modern patients still find comfort in prayer or spiritual rituals alongside medical treatment. The main difference is now we understand these as complementary rather than primary therapies. This blended approach might be one lasting legacy of ancient medical traditions. So when we consider things like medieval exorcisms, we're seeing more than just superstition. We're seeing entire medical systems built around different core assumptions. The treatments follow logically from the principles, just as ours do today. The difference lies in those foundational ideas about what causes people to fall ill in the first place. Imagine needing brain surgery with stone tools and no anesthesia. That was trephination, one of humanity's oldest medical procedures. Archaeologists have found trephine skulls dating back 7,000 years across 5 continents. The practice wasn't rare or unusual. It was standard treatment for everything from seizures to skull fractures. The process was as brutal as it sounds. Using sharpened flint or obsidian, healers would scrape or drill through the living skull. Some cultures made circular cuts, others created square openings. The goal wasn't to kill the patient, but to release whatever was causing their suffering, whether spirits, bad air, or pressure. Remarkably, many survived. Examination of ancient skulls shows bone regrowth around the holes, proving patients lived years after the procedure. Different cultures developed their own techniques. The Inca in Peru achieved astonishing precision, using tumi knives to make neat rectangular openings. European trephiners preferred circular holes created by scraping. North African healers sometimes removed multiple sections of bone. Despite these differences, the shared practice suggests independent discovery of what seemed like a logical treatment. Trephination treated physical injuries as much as mental ones. Warriors with head wounds often received the procedure, likely to remove bone fragments or relieve pressure. But it also addressed mysterious conditions like epilepsy or chronic pain. Without modern understanding, ancient healers assumed something physical needed releasing, whether trapped spirits or imbalanced fluids. The practice persisted far longer than most realize. While we associate it with prehistoric times, records show trephination continued well into the Renaissance. Medieval surgeons used specialized tools resembling modern cranial drills. The famous 16th century physician Ambroise Paré described trephination techniques in his surgical texts, though by then the practice was declining in Europe. Surprisingly, trephination may have helped some patients, just not in the way healers intended. Modern analysis suggests the procedure could relieve intracranial pressure from head trauma. The pain relief some patients reported might have come from endorphin release following the trauma of surgery. Of course, many didn't survive the infection risks or surgical errors. Excavated skulls reveal the procedure's risks. Some show multiple attempts, partially scraped areas adjacent to completed holes. Others display telltale fracture lines from slipped tools. Yet the sheer number of healed specimens proves many endured the ordeal. In France alone, archaeologists have identified over 120 prehistoric trephine skulls, with about 2/3 showing signs of healing. The aftermath might seem as strange as the surgery itself. Some cultures preserved the removed bone discs as amulets. These were often perforated and worn around the neck, believed to offer protection or healing. In other cases, the bone fragments were buried separately under special rituals. The practice reflects spiritual beliefs wrapped up in what we'd consider purely medical treatment. Ancient medical texts describe the process in detail. The Hippocratic Corpus, written around 400 BCE, gives instructions for trephining. It warns against cutting too deep to avoid damaging the membrane protecting the brain. The text recommends the procedure for skull fractures, where bone fragments might cause infection, showing some practical understanding beneath the spiritual explanations. Preparation for the surgery was often ritualistic. Many cultures perform cleansing ceremonies beforehand. The patient might fast or take herbal preparations, now recognized as having mild sedative effects. Some accounts describe shamans singing or chanting during the operation, which could have helped calm the patient through the ordeal. The tools evolved over time. Early trephiners used sharpened stones, later switching to metal instruments as technology advanced. The Romans developed specialized bronze tools, resembling modern surgical equipment. By medieval times, trephination kits included various sized drills, saws, and lifters for removing bone sections. Surprisingly sophisticated for what we consider primitive medicine. Children weren't exempt from the procedure. Archaeologists have found trephined skulls of individuals as young as 4 years old. Some show evidence of multiple procedures at different ages. This suggests certain chronic conditions might have been treated repeatedly over a lifetime. The survival of these young patients speaks to both the resilience of children and the skill of ancient surgeons. Different cultures had unique theories about why it worked. Some Native American tribes believed the holes allowed evil spirits to escape. Medieval European doctors thought they balanced the body's 4 humors. The Inca may have seen it as relieving pressure caused by mountain sickness. Despite different explanations, the shared solution speaks to common human problem solving. The popularity of trephination waned as other treatments developed. By the 18th century, few European doctors performed it regularly. But remote cultures continued the practice well into modern times. Photographs from early 20th century Africa show tribal healers performing trephination using traditional methods, while contemporary medical observers took notes. Modern medicine occasionally revisits ancient techniques. Some neurosurgeons have studied trephination for insights into early surgical practices. The procedure survives in modified form today as a treatment for certain traumatic brain injuries, though now with sterilization, anesthesia, and precise imaging to guide the surgeon's hand. Looking at these ancient skulls, we see more than just holes in bone. They represent early attempts to understand and heal the human brain. The careful workmanship on many specimens shows this wasn't reckless experimentation. It was deliberate, practiced medicine by standards of the time. What's most surprising isn't that they tried it, but that it sometimes worked well enough for patients to endure it repeatedly. Some skulls show multiple trephinations performed at different times. These individuals turned for more, suggesting they found enough relief to justify undergoing the ordeal again. This challenges our view of ancient medicine as uniformly ineffective. While many did die from the procedure, enough survived to keep the practice alive for millennia. The healing we see in ancient skulls proves some patients truly benefited, even if not for the reasons their doctors supposed. The excised pieces of skull bone were sometimes kept as amulets, suggesting a belief in their protective or healing properties. This practice continued well into the Middle Ages, showing how physical and spiritual healing remained intertwined. Ultimately, trephination represents both the ingenuity and limitations of early medicine. It was a solution born from careful observation. People noticed symptoms improved after head injuries, but constrained by incomplete understanding of human biology. The procedure faded as science offered better explanations and safer treatments. but its long reign shows how humans persist in seeking solutions, even with imperfect knowledge. While trephination seems horrifying today, it was considered cutting-edge treatment for thousands of years. That's worth remembering next time we feel smug about modern medicine. Future generations may view some of our current practices with equal disbelief. From demonic possession to skull drilling, humanity's quest to understand illness took many strange turns. But not all strange treatments involve surgery. Some relied on equally unusual ingredients and rituals. In medieval Europe, having depression or hallucinations could land you in serious trouble. The church had taken over most medical thinking, and their explanation was simple. Strange behavior meant demonic possession. This was a huge step backward from Greek and Roman medicine, which had started exploring natural causes for illness. Now, instead of doctors treating conditions like schizophrenia, priests performed exorcisms. The church's methods were brutal. They believed pain could drive out demons, so flogging became standard treatment. Prayer, fasting, and holy water were administered to purge evil spirits. In extreme cases, they chained sufferers in churches for days during exorcism rituals. Some didn't survive these ordeals. What we'd now recognize as epileptic seizures or psychotic episodes were seen as proof the devil was fighting to stay. This thinking had deadly consequences during the witch trials. Many so-called witches displayed symptoms of mental illness, hearing voices, erratic behavior, or depression. Historical records describe accused women who spoke to invisible people or claimed supernatural powers, classic signs of untreated psychiatric conditions. But inquisitors saw only demonic pacts requiring punishment. Estimates suggest thousands of mentally ill people were executed as witches. Public exorcisms became mass spectacles. Crowds gathered to watch priests battle demons in afflicted individuals. The more violent the convulsions, the more convinced people were of possession. These performances reinforced church authority. If demons were real, so was the need for religious intervention. Towns recorded exorcisms like theatrical events, with tickets sometimes sold to spectators. Not everyone accepted these ideas. In the 1560s, German physician Johann Weyer published On the Deceits of the Demons, arguing many witches were mentally ill, not satanic. He described case studies of women with clear symptoms of what we'd now call bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. The church banned his book immediately. Clergy denounced Weyer as a tool of the devil himself, a common tactic against early scientists. The few hospitals treating mental illness operated like prisons. Patients were restrained with iron manacles or ropes, often in freezing basements. Treatments included spinning chairs, meant to shake loose evil spirits through centrifugal force. Ice baths and starvation diets aimed to weaken the demons inside. Some doctors used bleeding, believing it could restore humoral balance, disrupted by possession. By the Renaissance, asylums replaced monasteries as holding pens for the mentally ill. Bethlehem Hospital in London, nicknamed Bedlam, opened in 1547 as one of the first specialized institutions. But conditions were horrific. Wealthy visitors paid to tour the facilities, laughing at chained patients. The word Bedlam entered English as a synonym for chaos because of these cruel exhibitions. Records show keepers beat patients routinely, claiming violence subdued demons. One standard treatment involved dunking people in water until they nearly drowned, a medieval form of shock therapy. The same era that produced Da Vinci and Michelangelo also saw mentally ill people treated worse than animals simply because the church framed their conditions as spiritual failings. The line between medicine and superstition blurred completely. Some recipes for treating madness included drinking holy wine mixed with crushed gemstones. Physicians prescribed wearing amulets containing bat's blood to ward off evil spirits. Many treatments combined herbs with prayers, showing how even practical remedies got tangled with Zongjiao doctrine. Certain behaviors became proof of satanic influence. Dancing manias, where groups of people would dance uncontrollably for days, were interpreted as mass possession. Women grieving lost children were often diagnosed with love sickness caused by demonic temptation. Melancholy, what we'd call depression, was blamed on the sin of sloth or lack of faith. The Church's control stifled medical progress for centuries. Ancient Greek texts about natural causes of disease were locked away in monastery libraries, labeled dangerous. Autopsies were banned, preventing study of brain disorders. This created a feedback loop. Without scientific inquiry, supernatural explanations went unchallenged. Patients who recovered from mental illness faced stigma. Many were required to wear identifying badges marking them as former demoniacs. Some villages banished anyone who'd suffered possession, fearing relapse. Marriage records show families often hid relatives with mental conditions to avoid suspicion of hereditary demonic influence. Not all cultures shared Europe's extreme views. Islamic hospitals in Spain and the Middle East continued Greek medical traditions during this period. Jewish communities often secluded mentally ill family members at home rather than turning them over to authorities. But in Christian Europe, the Church's doctrine dominated completely. By the 1600s, asylums had become warehouses for society's unwanted. Not just the mentally ill, but orphans, beggars, and the chronically sick. Keepers weren't doctors but jailers hired for strength, not medical knowledge. Mortality rates were staggering, with more patients dying from neglect and abuse than from their conditions. Attempts at reform were crushed. When doctors like Paracelsus suggested mental illness had physical causes, the Church accused them of heresy. Pioneers who advocated kindness over chains lost their licenses. It wasn't until the 1700s that science began chipping away at religious explanations, but centuries of damage had already been done. The legacy lingers in modern attitudes. The idea that mental illness reflects moral weakness persists in some communities. Words like lunatic and madhouse come from this era when suffering was entertainment and treatment was torture. We've come far, but traces of medieval thinking still color how society views psychiatric disorders. Historical records reveal heartbreaking cases. In 1491, a German woman named Walpurga Hausmann was executed after displaying symptoms of postpartum psychosis. Her confession describes classic delusions, believing she flew at night or harmed her children. Clear signs of untreated mental illness. Trial documents show no one considered medical explanations. The few humane doctors of the era worked in secret. Some monastery infirmaries quietly applied herbal remedies while performing required exorcism theatrics. Apothecaries sold sedatives like opium under the guise of demon-weakening potions. This dual system let some real treatment continue under religious cover. Interestingly, the Church's own records undermine its claims. Exorcism manuals describe demons that always conform to current stereotypes. No medieval demon ever described something the priest didn't already know. Cases that resisted standard exorcism rituals were declared special demons, never proof the theory was flawed. The Reformation changed little. Protestants embraced possession theories too. Martin Luther once advised drowning a boy he believed possessed, saying death would purify his soul. Both Catholic and Protestant territories persecuted the mentally ill with equal fervor. Science, not theology, eventually forced change. Art from the period shows the horror. Paintings depict exorcism scenes where priests loom over writhing patients. Broadside ballads told sensational stories of demoniacs vomiting nails or speaking in tongues. These weren't neutral depictions, but propaganda reinforcing church authority over both body and mind. Looking back, it's hard to grasp how thoroughly the supernatural explanation took hold. For nearly 1,000 years, Europe abandoned Greek medical knowledge in favor of dogma. The cost was immense. Generations suffered terribly because illness was framed as sin or possession, rather than a medical condition needing treatment. Modern psychiatry still bears scars from this era. The division between physical and mental illness stems from ancient spirit-body dualism. Even today, insurance companies often cover brain tumors better than depression. A lingering heir to the idea that minds are separate from biological bodies. The darkest twist? Some possessed individuals probably had treatable conditions. Lead poisoning from cookware caused paralysis and madness mistaken for demonic attack. Ergot fungus on rye bread induced hallucinations resembling possession. Syphilis, endemic in medieval Europe, caused psychiatric symptoms in its later stages. All were preventable or manageable with the knowledge available, had the Church not suppressed scientific inquiry for centuries. When we shake our heads at medieval superstition, we should remember it wasn't just ignorance, but the active suppression of knowledge that allowed such suffering to continue. While Europe waged war on imagined demons, other cultures found different approaches. Over in Egypt, doctors were developing methods that, while sometimes strange, at least stayed grounded in the physical world. They had their own unusual ideas about diagnosing illness, and it all started with a taste test. Ancient Egyptian doctors had a distinctive approach to diagnosing illness. They tasted their patients' bodily fluids. This wasn't occasional experimentation, but standard practice. When you visited a physician in ancient Egypt, they might sample your urine, examine your earwax, or even taste your pus to determine what was wrong. The Ebers Papyrus, one of their main medical texts, describes these methods in detail. This practice made sense in their medical framework. Egyptians believed the body contained channels called metu that carried fluids like blood, tears, and urine. When these channels became blocked or unbalanced, illness resulted. By tasting and examining bodily secretions, doctors could identify which systems were malfunctioning. Sweet urine, for example, might indicate what we now recognize as diabetes, though they interpreted it differently. Specialization was surprisingly advanced. Egyptian medicine had distinct practitioners for different body parts, something like modern specialists. There were eye doctors, tooth doctors, and even shepherds of the anus, who focused on digestive issues. The Edwin Smith Papyrus shows they understood trauma surgery remarkably well, with detailed descriptions of head injuries and spinal treatments. Some procedures they developed, like setting broken bones, wouldn't look out of place in an emergency room today. Their cancer treatments were shockingly sophisticated. The same Edwin Smith Papyrus describes what appears to be breast cancer, noting hard tumors with spreading veins. Doctors burned away growths using a heated tube, an early form of cauterization. They also developed salves containing crushed minerals and herbs to reduce swelling. some of which modern analysis shows had genuine anti-inflammatory properties. Not all their remedies were equally effective. Treatment for eye infections involved mixing bull's bile with honey and pouring it directly into the eye. For earaches, they injected a cocktail of olive oil, crushed ants, and bat wings. Some prescriptions called for lizard blood or mashed donkey teeth. Yet alongside these questionable cures, they developed legitimate analgesics using opium and effective wound dressings using honey's natural antibacterial properties. Their gynecological knowledge was particularly advanced. Egyptian doctors understood fertility cycles better than many later civilizations. They used pessaries made from acacia gum, which we now know has spermicidal properties, and diagnosed pregnancy by having women urinate on barley and wheat seeds to see which sprouted first. Modern tests show this method actually works about 70% of the time, likely because pregnant women's urine contains certain hormones that affect plant growth. Mental health treatment blended practical and spiritual approaches. The Ebers Papyrus describes depression as both a physical imbalance and spiritual affliction. Treatments might include soothing herbs alongside incantations to drive away evil spirits. For nightmares, they prescribed wearing amulets, while also drinking a sedative mixture of poppy extract and honey. Pharmacology was surprisingly complex. Egyptian drug preparations included pills, ointments, inhalants, and suppositories. They knew to use binders like milk or wine to make medicines palatable, and some prescriptions specify exact dosages based on the patient's size. They developed early painkillers using willow bark, a natural source of salicylic acid, the precursor to aspirin. Surgical tools found in tombs show impressive craftsmanship. Archaeologists have discovered bronze scalpels, probes, and forceps nearly identical to modern instruments. Some surgical kits included specialized tools for procedures like cataract removal. The precision of these implements suggests Egyptian surgeons performed operations far more complex than we once believed. Doctors followed strict examination protocols. Medical texts outline a systematic approach. First inspection, then touching, then questioning the patient. They checked pulse points at the wrists and neck, though they didn't understand circulation as we do. The Edwin Smith Papyrus lists detailed case studies, showing doctors recognize patterns in symptoms and outcomes. Despite their advanced methods, Egyptian medicine remained bound by superstition in some areas. They believed the uterus could wander through the body, causing various ailments, a concept that persisted in Western medicine for centuries. Treatments for wandering womb involved placing foul-smelling substances near the patient's nose to drive the uterus back into position, while sweet perfumes near the vagina would attract it downward. Their dentistry was oddly mixed in effectiveness. They could fill cavities with mineral pastes and stabilize loose teeth with gold wire. Advanced techniques for the time. Yet they also believed tooth decay was caused by tiny worms, a myth that endured until the 18th century. Mummies show severe tooth wear from stone ground flour in bread, but also surprisingly sophisticated dental work in some cases. Public health measures were remarkably progressive. Egyptian cities had sanitation systems and workers collected garbage regularly, unlike medieval European cities centuries later. Medical texts advise quarantining contagious patients, and there's evidence they attempted early forms of vaccination by exposing people to small amounts of infected material. Training was rigorous. Medical students learned through apprenticeship, studying scrolls and observing experienced doctors. The temple at Sais housed a major medical school where students practiced on models and dissected animals. though human dissection was forbidden. Graduates had to swear an oath to treat all patients equally, regardless of wealth or status. Doctors faced consequences for failure. Legal records show malpractice lawsuits where physicians were fined for botched treatments. Successful doctors could become quite wealthy, with some rising to prominent positions advising pharaohs. Tomb inscriptions boast of medical achievements, suggesting high social standing for skilled practitioners. The Egyptian approach to disability was surprisingly practical. Rather than abandoning those with injuries or congenital conditions, they developed prosthetics and assistive devices. Archaeologists have found wooden toes that show signs of wear, suggesting actual use. Some mummies reveal healed fractures that would require lengthy care, proving communities supported injured members through recovery. Children's medicine receives special attention. Medical texts contain sections on treating childhood illnesses and injuries. Prescriptions specify reduced doses for younger patients. There's evidence they understood concepts like fever management and hydration, recommending fluids and cool baths for sick children. Amulets for infant protection were common, but so were practical remedies for colic and teething pain. Veterinary medicine developed alongside human treatment. Egyptian doctors also treated animals, especially those important to agriculture or religion. They developed treatments for livestock diseases and even performed surgery on sacred cats and dogs. Some veterinary prescriptions mirror human ones, with adjusted dosages for different species. Their understanding of anatomy was limited by religious taboos. Because mummification required removing internal organs, Egyptians knew organ shapes and positions better than many ancient cultures. Yet they never fully understood organ functions, believing the heart controlled thought and emotion while the brain was just head stuffing. Still, they recognized brain injuries affected movement and senses, documenting cases where head trauma caused paralysis. Herbal medicine reached sophisticated levels. Egyptian gardens cultivated medicinal plants like garlic, aloe, and coriander. They developed extraction methods to isolate active compounds, creating early essential oils and tinctures. Some prescriptions specify collecting plants at certain seasons for maximum potency, showing careful observation of plant chemistry. Medical texts reveal surprising psychological insight. The Chester Beatty Papyrus describes treatments for what we'd call stress-related conditions, recommending rest, pleasant surroundings, and mild sedatives. Doctors recognized that emotional distress could manifest physically, prescribing different treatments based on whether symptoms stemmed from a heavy heart or bodily imbalance. Trade expanded their medical knowledge. Egyptians imported drugs from as far away as India and sub-Saharan Africa. They traded medical texts with Mesopotamian doctors and borrowed techniques from Nubian healers. This exchange created a diverse medical system, incorporating ideas from across the ancient world. Military medicine became highly developed. Battlefield surgeons learned to extract arrowheads, stitch wounds, and prevent infection using antiseptic resins. Military camps had organized medical corps with trained stretcher bearers. Some papyri describe triage systems prioritizing treatable injuries over hopeless cases, an early example of medical efficiency under pressure. The Egyptians pioneered medical documentation. Case records show careful observation of symptoms, treatments, and outcomes over time. The Edwin Smith Papyrus reads like a modern textbook, organizing cases from head injuries down the body, with notes like, "An ailment I will treat," versus "an ailment not to be treated," recognizing some conditions were beyond their capabilities. legacy matters more than quirkiness. While the urine tasting seems bizarre today, Egyptian medicine contributed real advances. Their systematic approach to diagnosis, emphasis on cleanliness, and development of effective drugs laid foundations future civilizations built upon. Even their mistakes taught valuable lessons, showing what didn't work as clearly as what did. Perhaps most impressively, Egyptian medicine lasted largely unchanged for nearly 3,000 years, a testament to its effectiveness in its time. While later Greek physicians dismissed some Egyptian practices, they adopted many others. The famous Greek doctor Hippocrates likely studied Egyptian medical texts, inheriting their emphasis on observation and documentation. The transition to Greek medicine brought new theories about bodily fluids, but organized them into a system even more rigid than Egypt's. Where Egyptian doctors adapted treatments based on observation, Greek physicians would insist on balancing 4 theoretical humors for centuries, whether it helped patients or not. And that system, surprisingly, would dominate Western medicine for over 2,000 years. For nearly 2,000 years, doctors believed your personality and health depended on just 4 fluids sloshing around your body. This was the humoral theory, one of medicine's most enduring mistakes. Hippocrates proposed that blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile controlled everything from your temperament to whether you got sick. Each humor supposedly had distinct properties. Blood was warm and wet, phlegm cold and wet, yellow bile warm and dry, black bile cold and dry. This simple but flawed idea shaped treatments for centuries. The system mapped neatly onto other ancient concepts. The 4 humors corresponded to the classical elements: blood with air, phlegm with water, yellow bile with fire, black bile with earth. They also matched the 4 seasons and even points on the compass. This false symmetry gave the theory an air of completeness that made it hard to challenge. When Galen later expanded Hippocrates' ideas in Rome, the system became medical dogma for over a millennium. Diagnosis revolved around spotting excess humors. Doctors believed melancholy, what we'd call depression, came from too much black bile. The word melancholy itself comes from Greek words meaning black bile. Phlegmatic people, thought to have excess phlegm, were described as sluggish and unemotional. Choleric types with dominant yellow bile were quick-tempered, while sanguine people with abundant blood were cheerful and active. These classifications persisted into the Renaissance, appearing in everything from medical texts to Shakespeare's plays. Bloodletting became the go-to treatment for imbalance. Physicians opened veins to remove excess blood, sometimes draining pints at once. Leeches were precision tools, applied to specific body parts depending on which humor needed adjusting. For black bile disorders, they might bleed the right hand. For phlegm issues, the left. Records show doctors prescribing monthly preventative bleeding for healthy patients based on season. Winter called for more phlegm-reducing treatments, summer for yellow bile control. Drugs targeted humoral balance too. Purgatives cleared excess bile, and emetics rid the body of phlegm. Theophrastus, an early botanist, catalogued hundreds of plants for their effects on the humors. Some worked by sheer luck. Willow bark reduced fevers because it contained salicin, the chemical ancestor of aspirin. Others were useless or harmful. Many prescriptions mixed drugs with astrology, advising collection under certain moon phases for maximum effect. Doctors used diet as medical treatment. Foods could allegedly rebalance humors. Warm, moist foods countered black bile dominance. The The famous physician Maimonides wrote entire dietary guides explaining which foods produced which humours. Pomegranates supposedly increased blood, while lentils decreased it. These ideas linger today in phrases like cool as a cucumber, referencing the old belief cucumbers reduced yellow bile's heat. Music therapy entered the mix through humoral theory. Theophrastus prescribed flute music for panic attacks and harp melodies for epilepsy. Different instruments supposedly affected humours differently. Loud brass instruments stimulated blood circulation. Soft strings calmed yellow bile. Some doctors played music near wounds, believing the vibrations helped healing. The philosopher Democritus even claimed flute music could cure viper bites. Personality assessments grew from this system. Medieval doctors diagnosed temperament by examining patients' faces, pulses, and waist. Someone with a round face and slow movements was called phlegmatic, while thin, restless individuals were choleric. Universities taught humoral psychology alongside medicine well into the 1700s. The four temperaments appear in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales and other literature as shorthand for character types. Mental health treatment followed humoral lines. Melancholia patients got heating treatments like spicy foods to counter cold black bile. Manic patients received cooling baths for their presumed yellow bile excess. The Roman physician Celsus recommended dark rooms and quiet for over-sanguine patients. Some treatments had unintended benefits. Music therapy for anxiety likely helped through relaxation, just as it does today. Seasonal adjustments reflected humoral thinking. Spring called for blood-reducing diets, summer for bile-curbing measures. Autumn required phlegm management, winter black bile control. Even healthy people followed seasonal regimens, eating lighter in summer, heavier in winter. These practices influenced European cooking traditions more than we realize. The concept of spring cleansing stems from humoral medicine. The system created odd diagnostic tools. Urine inspection involved elaborate color charts, matching shades to humoral states. The urine wheel had 20 different possible hues, each indicating specific imbalances. Doctors tasted urine like their Egyptian predecessors, believing sweetness signaled blood dominance. Bitterness, yellow bile. Some physicians diagnosed by smelling breath or examining earwax consistency. Medical education revolved around humoral balance. Students memorized endless combinations, which humor caused fever with shivering, phlegm, versus fever without, yellow bile. Texts contained intricate diagrams showing humor flows through the body. A 12th century manuscript depicts veins as irrigation channels, needing occasional draining, a perfect metaphor for bloodletting's perceived necessity. Some concepts were strangely prescient. Hippocrates correctly linked some mental disorders to brain dysfunction rather than spirits. His observation that head injuries could change personality anticipated neuroscience by millennia. The idea that environment affects health also proved correct. He noted malaria occurred near swamps, though he blamed bad air rather than mosquitoes. The system's failures became obvious over time. Patients bled repeatedly, often worsened, but doctors blamed incorrect balance rather than flawed theory. When Charles II suffered a stroke in 1685, physicians drained 24 ounces of blood, applied heated cups to draw more, then gave emetics and enemas, treatment that likely hastened his death. Such cases mounted but couldn't shake humoral theory's grip. Medical instruments evolved for humoral treatments. Bloodletting knives gave way to spring-loaded lancets for quick vein opening. Specialized cups created suction to draw blood, while ornate leech jars stored medical parasites in style. Barber surgeons, the era's medical practitioners, displayed red and white poles symbolizing bloody bandages wrapped around poles to dry. Drug preparation followed humoral rules. Pharmacists mixed ingredients to counter specific humors: pepper for phlegm, sour fruits for bile. Some recipes contained dozens of ingredients to hit multiple humors simultaneously. The more balanced a drug's properties, the more broadly applicable it was considered. This led to wildly complex prescriptions that sometimes cancelled each other out. Women's health suffered under this system. Physicians believed menstruation naturally balanced female humors, so they bled women who missed periods. Pregnancy diets focused on producing balanced breast milk by the humoral standards. Menopause was seen as dangerous black bile buildup requiring regular purges. These practices continued into the 19th century under different justifications. The theory shaped public health measures. Plague doctors prescribed burning aromatic herbs to correct corrupt air, upsetting humors. Cities fumigated streets with vinegar during outbreaks, aiming to dry excess moisture, phlegm, in the atmosphere. Such measures occasionally helped by killing germs, incidentally, reinforcing belief in the system. Criticism emerged but gained little traction. A few Arab physicians noted inconsistencies, and Renaissance scientists like Paracelsus rejected the theory outright. But the weight of tradition kept it dominant. Universities taught Galen's writings as gospel. Change only came when microscope observations revealed bacteria and blood circulation patterns that contradicted humor-based explanations. The humors left linguistic traces still with us. We describe anger as bilious, sadness as melancholy, calm people as phlegmatic. Good humor originally meant proper bodily balance. Medical terms like phlegm and bilirubin, from bile, keep these old ideas in our vocabulary. Even disposition comes from the Latin for how humors were disposed in the body. Psychology still uses humoral echoes. Carl Jung's personality types borrow from temperament theory, as do modern trait assessments. The idea that biochemistry affects mood turned out to be true, just not via 4 magical fluids. Antidepressants that alter serotonin levels unwittingly fulfill the ancient quest to chemically balance disposition. What's striking is how long this persisted. From Hippocrates around 400 BCE until the mid-1800s, Western medicine clung to this model. That's longer than Christianity has existed as a major religion. Only germ theory finally displaced it, showing how hard-set medical beliefs become once established. The humor's reign proves even brilliant systems can be wrong for centuries if they're elegant enough. The theory's dismissal in the 19th century wasn't gentle. Reformers mocked it as primitive by comparison to germ-based science. Yet in its time, humoral theory represented real progress, moving medicine from pure superstition toward systematic observation. That it was flawed doesn't negate its historical importance in medical evolution. Sometimes wrong ideas are necessary steps toward right ones. While European doctors debated humors, another medical tradition was brewing, one that involved grinding up corpses and drinking them as medicine. The medieval belief in healing through human remains may be the most shocking medical detour of all. In medieval Europe, pharmacies stocked an unusual ingredient: ground-up mummies. This wasn't some black market operation. It was standard medical practice. For centuries, doctors prescribed human remains as medicine, believing the dead held healing power. The rich carried pouches of mummy powder, like we carry aspirin today, taking doses for headaches, bruises, or plague protection. The practice started with Egyptian mummies. After Europeans discovered preserved bodies in Egyptian tombs, they developed theories about their medicinal properties. Arab physicians first wrote about mummy as medicine in the 10th century, and the idea spread west. By the 12th century, European apothecaries sold it openly. The demand grew so high that traders began faking mummies, burying slaves in sand to dry them quickly, then passing them off as ancient Egyptian remains. Not just any mummy would do. Physicians specified true mummy came from bodies embalmed with certain resins. The best specimens were supposedly young, healthy people who died violently. Their life force abruptly cut short was thought to linger in their remains. Recipes called for grinding bones, flesh, or the whole corpse into powder, often mixing it with other ingredients. A popular recipe combined mummy powder with rhubarb as a general cure-all. King Charles II took this seriously. His personal physician created King's Drops, a tincture made from powdered human skull dissolved in alcohol. Charles carried it everywhere, using it for everything from fatigue to seizures. Royal accounts show he paid large sums for the skull of a man who was never buried, likely an executed criminal. The recipe stayed in the royal family for generations, with later monarchs still using it in the 1700s. Mummy wasn't the only human ingredient. Medicine cabinets contain blood, fat, and bones from recently deceased people. Execution sites became pharmacies. People collected fresh blood from the scaffold, believing drinking it cured epilepsy. Barber surgeons kept jars of human fat for making salves. One German text recommends rubbing a dead man's hand on warts, claiming the contact transferred the death's power to kill the growths. The church supported these practices. Priests sometimes distributed bits of saints' bodies as medicine, called corpse medicine. Pilgrims visiting shrines might receive flakes of bone or dried skin to swallow with water. Clergy argued that holy remains carried divine healing power, making them superior to regular mummies. This blurred the line between religious relic and medical treatment. Doctors wrote detailed prescriptions. The 16th century physician Ambroise Paré recommended mummy powder mixed with turpentine for internal bleeding. Another text advises bandaging wounds with moss grown on a human skull. Pharmacies stocked multiple grades of mummy, whole pieces for wealthy patients, coarse powder for the poor. Prices varied based on the body's supposed origin and preservation quality. Even great minds believed in it. Galileo prescribed mummy powder for ailments. Francis Bacon wrote that you should select mummies carefully. The healthiest, least decayed bodies worked best. Robert Boyle, a founder of modern chemistry, included human skull preparations in his medical writings. This wasn't fringe science, but accepted practice among history's brightest thinkers. The reasoning made sense in context. Medieval medicine saw the body as a container of vital forces. If someone died suddenly, their remaining vitality could theoretically be transferred. Young, strong bodies held more power, just as eating meat strengthens our muscles. Consuming human flesh might pass along vigor. The logic followed humoral theory too, viewing mummy as a balancing substance. Global traditions mirrored this thinking. In China, medical texts listed human remains as drugs, fingernails for throat ailments, hair burns for nosebleeds. Some Australian Aboriginal groups use small amounts of deceased relatives' remains in rituals for health. South American cultures sometimes consumed ashes of the dead for spiritual and physical protection. The details differed, but the underlying idea crossed continents. The trade had dark ethics, Most mummy came from stolen Egyptian graves, but fresh corpses were also used. Executed criminals became valuable commodities, their bodies parceled out to doctors immediately after death. The poor risked body snatching if buried in unguarded graves. Some historians believe the desperate dug up relatives to sell body parts when starving. Preparation methods were precise. Apothecaries sun-dried flesh first to prevent rot, then ground it slowly. Recipes specified which body parts work best: skulls for epilepsy, heart muscle for courage. Storage mattered too. Mummy kept in silver boxes was thought more potent. Some mixed the powder with gold leaf or pearls to enhance its effects for wealthy patrons. Not everyone approved. A few Renaissance doctors questioned mummy's effectiveness. The anatomist Andreas Vesalius mocked colleagues who prescribed the dried flesh of some thief. By the 1600s, some apothecaries began refusing to stock it. But change came slowly. German medical texts still listed human fat ointments in the 18th century. Why did it last so long? Several factors sustained the practice. Doctors noted that some patients improved after taking mummy, likely because their conditions would have resolved anyway. The placebo effect probably played a role too. But mostly, the worldview supporting it persisted. Until germ theory replaced old ideas about vitality and balance, corpse medicine made twisted sense. The uses were surprisingly specific. One English text claims, powdered mummy cured all disorders proceeding from cold. Another says it prevented limbs from stiffening after strenuous activity. Wounds dressed with mummy powder bandages supposedly resisted infection. Some women took it during pregnancy, believing it strengthened the unborn child. Different preparations targeted different ailments. A paste of mummy powder and honey treated skin ulcers. Dissolving the powder in wine allegedly helped internal bleeding. For epilepsy, patients wore pouches of mummy around their necks, sniffing them during attacks. Burns received dressings soaked in human fat mixed with rose oil. The flavor reportedly varied. Accounts describe good mummy as tasting bitter, with a resinous aftertaste, from embalming materials. Fake mummies made from freshly dried corpses supposedly lacked this complexity. Some recipes advised mixing with strong wines or spices to mask the flavor for delicate patients. Skepticism grew with exploration. As Europeans traveled more, they realized Egyptian embalmers used pitch and chemicals, not magic resins. Autopsies showed mummies weren't specially charged with life force, just preserved. Colonial doctors in America started rejecting imported mummy in favor of local herbs by the early 1700s. The decline coincided with new medical models. When scientists like Harvey proved blood circulated mechanically, not as a vital fluid, corpse medicine lost theoretical support. Germ theory finally killed it. Once doctors understood disease spread, cannibalizing corpses seemed recklessly unhygienic rather than healing. Yet traces lingered. Some rural healers continued using human-derived cures into the 19th century. A few folk remedies, like rubbing warts with a dead man's hand, persisted longer. Even today, components from human placentas appear in some cosmetics, showing the old idea never fully disappeared, just transformed. The psychological aspect explains much. In an era where death was ever present, consuming the dead might have felt like gaining their resistance to mortality. Symbolically, it let the living absorb strength from those who'd endured life's worst. Modern medicine focuses on molecules, but medieval medicine treated symbols as substances. What's haunting is how recently this ended. Queen Victoria's physicians still occasionally prescribed human-derived cures. The 1858 edition of the British Pharmacopoeia, the official drug manual, still listed mummy as a medical ingredient. Only when modern pharmaceuticals proved consistently effective did corpse medicine finally vanish from legitimate practice. Looking back, the practice seems horrific. But in context, it was no more strange than other medical theories of the time. For medieval people facing constant illness with few effective treatments, harnessing every possible resource made sense. The real surprise isn't that they tried it, but that educated people defended it for so long against growing evidence. This wasn't primitive superstition, but sophisticated medical theory gone wrong. The same logic that now gives us blood transfusions once justified drinking ground-up corpses. Both stem from the idea that substances from one body can heal another. We just understand the mechanisms better now. Human fat treatments lasted especially long. Surgeons saved amputated limbs to render their fat for ointments well into the 1700s. The famous surgeon John Hunter wrote instructions for preparing human fat for medical use. Some museums preserved 19th century jars labeled Adeps Humanus, human fat, from pharmacy stocks. Endorsements from authority figures lent credibility. When famous physicians like Guy de Chauliac prescribed mummy, others followed. Royal courts using corpse medicine gave it prestige. The papal physician's approval made it acceptable to the church. Like many bad medical ideas, it persisted because respected voices repeated it uncritically. Supply logistics reveal much. Egyptian mummy imports formed a major trade route through Venice. Sailors told tales of mummy smugglers caught with stolen mummies in their cargo. Some Egyptian tombs show evidence of medieval looters taking only certain body parts, likely fulfilling specific medical orders from Europe. Modern analysis cast doubt on efficacy. Tests on surviving mummy samples show no special medicinal properties, just dehydrated tissue with embalming chemicals. Any benefits likely came from accompanying ingredients like wine or herbs, not the human remains themselves. Yet for centuries, no one systematically tested this. The transition away was messy. As skepticism grew, apothecaries still sold mummy but labeled it as something else. Later, pharmacopoeias listed it as mumia to distance it from human origins. Some mixed it with plant substitutes so customers wouldn't know they consumed corpses. The truth faded before the practice did. Psychological comfort played a role. Facing deadly epidemics with no cures, people clung to anything offering hope. Using the dead to heal the living might have provided symbolic reassurance. If death's agents could be harnessed, perhaps death itself could. In medieval Europe, the difference between poison and medicine often came down to dosage. The same substances that could kill a man at supper might cure his headache the next morning. This dangerous duality made apothecaries both respected and feared. They held the knowledge to heal or harm with nearly identical ingredients. Arsenic, one of history's deadliest poisons, routinely appeared in medical recipes. Doctors used it to treat everything from syphilis to cancer, carefully measuring minuscule amounts that wouldn't kill the patient. Avicenna, the famous Persian physician, tried bringing order to this chaotic practice. His 11th century book on toxicology separated myths from chemical facts for the first time. He categorized poisons by their effects rather than superstitions, noting which ones cause paralysis versus internal bleeding. His work described antidotes too. Certain clays could absorb arsenic if taken quickly enough. This scientific approach was groundbreaking. though many healers still relied on folk remedies alongside it. Political intrigue kept poison fears alive. Royal courts became breeding grounds for poison paranoia after several high-profile assassinations. The court of the Trastámaras in medieval Spain saw multiple poisoning cases, making rulers test their food with poison-detecting crystals. Some nobles wore bezoar stones, calcified stomach lumps from animals, believing they neutralized toxins. When Adelaide del Vasto, Countess of Sicily, was accused of poisoning rivals, it reinforced suspicions that lasted centuries. Medicine cabinets contained startling ingredients. Mandrake root, known for its human-shaped appearance, could induce unconsciousness in small doses, but cause fatal heart attacks if misused. Nightshade berries dilated pupils, giving us the word belladonna, while also treating pain. Henbane helped with insomnia, but could bring on terrifying hallucinations. Hellebore, a popular medication, treated everything from skin conditions to lung problems despite being deadly in wrong amounts. Doctors walked a razor's edge with these substances daily. Dosage instructions were terrifyingly vague. Recipes might call for a pinch of arsenic or the size of a pea of hemlock. Without standardized measurements, results varied wildly. Some physicians tested doses on prisoners before giving them to noble patients. Others relied on ancient texts that claimed certain poisons were safe if mixed with wine or honey. The line between cure and killer depended entirely on the preparer's shaky judgment. Poison's symbolic power shaped culture. Literature portrayed it as the weapon of schemers and fallen women. Shakespeare's plays featured poison in over half his tragedies. The famous Borgia family's rumoured poison rings entered legend, whether true or not. This cultural fear had consequences. When the Black Death hit, many blamed poisoners rather than germs, leading to violent persecutions of outsiders accused of tainting wells. Some treatments were deadlier than diseases. Mercury compounds used for syphilis caused kidney failure and brain damage. Lead-based cosmetics given as cures slowly poisoned aristocratic women. A popular digestive aid containing antimony made users vomit violently. Doctors claimed this purged toxins while ignoring the damage to their throats and teeth. Patients often died from the solution rather than the sickness. The poison trade flourished openly. Apothecaries sold arsenic alongside cinnamon, labeling both simply as powders. Wealthy households kept poison chests locked like treasured jewels. Certain monasteries specialized in growing toxic plants for medical use. Their gardens contained carefully tended patches of hemlock and monkshood. The same ships that brought spices from the east also carried deadly toxins labeled as medicines. Animal poisons entered the mix too. Apothecaries stocked dried Spanish fly, a beetle that caused blistering, but was also used as an aphrodisiac. Viper venom treated joint pain despite frequently killing the patient. Physicians applied bee stings to swollen areas, not realizing the histamine sometimes triggered fatal allergic reactions. Even toxic sea creatures like stonefish appeared in medical texts as last resort treatments. Testing methods were creative but flawed. The poison chicken test involved feeding suspected meat to a bird and watching for symptoms. Silver spoons supposedly blackened near poison. They actually reacted with sulfur compounds common in spoiled food. Some courts employed professional tasters who built up toxin immunities over years, though many died in the process. These unreliable methods persisted because no better options existed. Accidents happened regularly. Kitchen mix-ups sent entire noble families to early graves when cooks mistook arsenic for flour. King John of England allegedly died from eating a surfeit of peaches. Later, historians suspect the peaches were poisoned. Medical students occasionally poisoned themselves while preparing remedies, their deaths recorded as act of God rather than human error. Alchemy complicated matters further. Attempts to turn lead into gold produced toxic byproducts that some healers insisted had medical value. Mercury-based elixirs of life promised longevity while causing crippling neurological damage. A few alchemists successfully isolated useful compounds by accident. Discovering antimony's fever-reducing properties while trying to create philosopher's stone. The poor often got deadlier treatments. Wealthy patients received carefully measured doses prepared by experienced physicians. Peasants made do with homemade versions using guesswork. Herb wives brewed hemlock tea without knowing exact measurements. Survival rates reflected this divide, with far more poisoning deaths occurring in rural areas when knowledge was scarce. Some poisons healed in unexpected ways. Small doses of ergot fungus, which in large amounts causes convulsions, stopped postpartum bleeding. Willow bark containing salicylic acid, aspirin's ancestor, reduced fevers despite the plant's toxicity. Modern chemotherapy drugs echo this principle, using controlled poison to attack cancers. The medieval instinct that toxins could help wasn't wrong, just dangerously imprecise. Religious views shaped poison's reputation. Some clerics called it the coward's weapon, unfit for Christian souls. Others argued that since God made all plants, even deadly ones must have holy purposes. This debate affected medical practice. Monastic healers avoided certain poisons, while secular doctors embraced them. The papal court itself kept a famed poison specialist on staff for centuries. Diagnosis methods were equally risky. Doctors tasting patients' vomit to identify poisons sometimes ingested toxins themselves. Checking a victim's pulse after administering test poisons could reveal the original toxin, but often worsened the condition. Autopsies to detect poison frequently expose coroners to lethal substances through open wounds or fumes. The Renaissance brought slightly better methods. Poison detectors made from exotic materials like unicorn horn, actually narwhal tusks, gave way to chemical tests. Simple, litmus-like papers change color near acids. Still, without understanding molecular structures, physicians remained in the dark about why some mixtures killed while others cured. Trade routes expanded the poison pharmacopoeia. European explorers returned with new toxins like curare from South America, used medicinally to relax muscles during procedures. Asian contacts introduced strychnine, deadly in combat, but helpful in microscopic amounts for digestive issues. Each new substance offered potential cures and new ways to accidentally kill patients. Signature poisons became regional specialties. Italian assassins favored cantarella, a sweetened arsenic compound. The French had poudre de succession, inheritance powder. German poisoners used deadly amanita mushrooms. Ironically, these same substances appeared in each region's medical texts as treatments for specific ailments. Proving poison was always context-dependent. Economic factors influenced use too. Cheap poisons like lead appeared in many medicines because they were readily available. Expensive toxins such as gold salts were reserved for nobility, sometimes causing metal poisoning that turned skin blue. The poison trade became so lucrative that some cities taxed it like alcohol or spices. Animal testing slowly improved safety. By the 1600s, physicians regularly dosed dogs with new poison mixtures before human trials. Results were inconsistent. Species react differently to toxins, but better than nothing. Still, when the English royal physician prescribed gold-based sunshine pills for depression after dog tests, King Charles II nearly died from gold poisoning. Literature preserved poison knowledge. Herbals, illustrated books of medicinal plants, carefully noted which species could kill. Poison law passed orally among midwives and barber surgeons. When printing presses spread this information more widely, it ironically made both poisoning and poison healing more accessible to the public. The chemical revolution finally changed everything. As scientists isolated pure elements, they could measure doses exactly. Understanding pH levels explained why some poisons behaved predictably. The discovery of molecular structures let chemists modify toxins into safer forms. By the 19th century, the guesswork was fading, though not without resistance from traditional healers. What's chilling is how long this persisted alongside science. Well into the 1800s, some physicians still prescribed mercury for syphilis despite known risks. Lead makeup remained popular even as its dangers became undeniable. The transition from poison as medicine to modern pharmacology took centuries, with plenty of unnecessary deaths along the way. This dangerous duality reveals a fundamental truth about medieval medicine. Without understanding causes, doctors treated symptoms by any means available. If poison stopped pain or slowed infection, its risks seemed worth taking. Modern medicine still uses this principle. Chemotherapy proves that, but now with proper safety measures and scientific grounding. While physicians balanced these toxic treatments, another medical phenomenon was unfolding across medieval Europe. Whole towns gripped by uncontrollable dancing that sometimes ended in death. This bizarre phenomenon would challenge both religious and medical explanations for centuries to come. In the summer of 1518, a woman named Frau Trophea stepped into a Strasbourg street and began dancing. She didn't stop for days. Within a week, 34 others joined her. By month's end, over 400 people were dancing uncontrollably through the city. Some collapsed from exhaustion. Others died of heart attacks or strokes. This wasn't celebration. It was the dancing plague, one of history's most bizarre medical mysteries. These outbreaks weren't isolated. Similar events occurred across medieval Europe, with the first major wave hitting the Rhine region in 1374. Witness accounts describe people dancing until their feet bled, screaming for help while their bodies kept moving. Local governments responded by hiring musicians to play faster music, believing the dancers needed to get it out of their system. This only worsened the problem. Contemporary explanations varied wildly. Some blamed tarantula bites, a belief that gave rise to tarantism in Italy. Victims thought spider venom caused their compulsion to dance, and developed the tarantella dance as a cure. Others saw divine punishment. Church leaders declared the dancers possessed, organizing mass exorcisms that often left participants more traumatized. The timing wasn't random. Most outbreaks coincided with periods of extreme hardship. The 1374 plague followed the Black Death's devastation. The 1518 event occurred during famine. Chroniclers noted many dancers were poor, suggesting starvation's physical effects combined with psychological distress. Some modern researchers think vitamin deficiencies may have played a role. Severe thiamine deficiency can cause involuntary movements resembling dance. Medical responses often made things worse. Doctors applied leeches to dancers' feet, believing bad blood caused the movements. Some prescribed herbal sedatives, but doses strong enough to stop the dancing risked fatal respiratory depression. Town councils built special dance halls, hoping to contain the phenomenon. This just created spaces where hysteria could spread faster. The church's involvement complicated treatment. Priests performed exorcisms on dancing crowds, sometimes for days straight. Some victims reported temporary relief, likely from sheer exhaustion. Others became trapped in cycles of religious ecstasy and collapse. Records from Aachen describe dancers begging priests to stop the rituals, claiming the prayers intensified their torment. Modern theories offer several explanations. Mass psychogenic illness, a form of collective hysteria, fits many accounts. Stress from plague, famine, and warfare could have triggered dissociative states where people lost control of their bodies. The more others joined in, the more contagious the behavior became. This explains why entire towns sometimes became affected. Ergot poisoning presents another possibility. The fungus grows on damp rye, producing chemicals similar to LSD. Outbreaks often occurred after wet summers when ergot contamination was likely. Symptoms include muscle spasms and hallucinations that could manifest as compulsive dancing. However, this doesn't explain why only some grain consumers were affected while others weren't. Some cases may have been neurological disorders. Huntington's disease causes involuntary movements that could resemble dancing. Sydenham's chorea, linked to strep infections, produces similar symptoms. In populations with poor healthcare, these conditions might have gone undiagnosed, appearing suddenly in groups as plagues. Social factors played a clear role. Many dancers were young women, a demographic with little power in medieval society. Some historians interpret the outbreaks as subconscious protests against oppressive conditions. The dancing provided rare freedom of expression, even if involuntary. Contemporary accounts note participants sometimes laughed while weeping, suggesting complex psychological states. The music connection remains puzzling. Some outbreaks featured live bands paid to play continuously. This seems counterintuitive. Why encourage the behavior? One theory suggests medieval people believed in musical humors, thinking certain tunes could rebalance bodily fluids. Fast music might burn out the dancing compulsion. In reality, it probably just extended the episodes. Treatment attempts reveal medieval medicine's limits. When cooling baths failed, doctors tried bloodletting. When that failed, they prescribed pilgrimages. Some towns exiled dancers, fearing demonic contagion. A few accounts mention successful interventions, like the Cologne priest, who allegedly cured dancers by having them wear red shoes and drink watered wine. These cures likely coincided with the episode's natural endings. The plagues left cultural marks. The tarantella dance survives in Italian folklore. German woodcuts depict dancing manias as moral warnings. Shakespeare referenced them in plays like The Winter's Tale. The events became cautionary tales about losing control, whether to demons, stress, or societal pressures. Physical evidence supports some accounts. Archaeologists found mass graves near Strasbourg containing unusually young, otherwise healthy skeletons. Some show signs of extreme exertion before death, swollen joints, stress fractures. Contemporary reports mention dancers dying mid-step, which these burials seem to confirm. Climate data adds another layer. Tree rings from outbreak years show abnormal weather patterns. The 1374 event followed volcanic eruptions that caused global cooling and crop failures. The 1518 plague occurred during the Little Ice Age's peak. Environmental stress may have lowered populations' physical and mental resilience. Class divisions shaped responses. Wealthy victims received private care, doctors, herbal baths, soft restraints. The poor were often driven out of towns or confined in makeshift hospitals. Some records show nobles watching dancing peasants for entertainment, highlighting the era's stark inequalities. The plagues gradually faded as living conditions improved. Better harvests, reduced warfare, and plague resistance made societies more stable. The last major outbreak occurred in 17th century Madagascar, far from Europe, but following similar patterns of famine and stress. Modern parallels exist. Psychogenic illnesses still occur, like the 2011 Leroy mystery, where students developed unexplained tics. Social media accelerates these phenomena today, just as town squares did centuries ago. The mechanisms remain similar. Stress manifests physically, then spreads through observation and suggestion. Neuroscience offers new insights. Functional MRI studies show how stress can short-circuit motor control systems. Mirror neurons, brain cells that activate when observing actions, may explain the contagion effect. Dopamine imbalances could account for the compulsive movements. Medieval people lacked these concepts, but their descriptions match modern neurological understanding. The dancing plagues weren't just odd historical footnotes. They reveal how tightly health connects to social conditions. When communities face extreme stress, bodies sometimes rebel in ways culture can't explain. Medieval Europeans interpreted this through their worldview: demons, humors, divine wrath. Today, we'd call it mass psychogenic illness or stress response, but the underlying human vulnerability remains the same. These events also show medicine's limits when separated from science. Without germ theory or psychology, even intelligent responses often worsen suffering. The dancing plagues finally declined, not because of better treatments, but because living conditions improved enough to reduce collective stress levels. What's most striking is how long these outbreaks persisted. The Strasbourg plague lasted nearly 2 months, 8 weeks of continuous dancing in summer heat. That people kept joining in despite seeing others collapse speaks to the phenomenon's power. Whether neurological, psychological, or toxicological, something overrode basic survival instincts in these dancers. The plagues left one positive legacy. They helped discredit purely supernatural explanations of illness. When neither prayer nor exorcism reliably stopped the dancing, people began questioning old assumptions. This paved the way for more scientific approaches, though that transition would take centuries and face fierce resistance. Today we understand that mind and body aren't separate. Stress causes physical symptoms. Physical illness affects mental health. The dancing plagues were extreme examples of this connection. Whole communities manifesting distress through their bodies when no other outlet existed. While we've moved beyond blaming demons, modern medicine still grapples with psychosomatic illness. Chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, and other conditions show how stress and trauma become physical. The dancing plagues remind us that dismissing unexplained illnesses as all in the head misses their very real effects on sufferers. These events also highlight medicine's social dimension. Contagious dancing spread fastest in tight-knit communities where people spent much time together. Today's mass hysteria cases cluster similarly: schools, offices, online groups. The medium changes, but the human tendency remains. The final documented cases coincided with the Enlightenment's beginnings. As scientific thinking spread, dancing plagues faded, not because stress disappeared, but because cultural frameworks for expressing it changed. People found other ways to manifest distress that fit new medical models. What really caused these events? Likely a perfect storm: environmental toxins, nutritional deficits, infectious diseases, and extreme stress combining in vulnerable populations. No single explanation suffices. The truth probably blended several factors medieval medicine couldn't separate. The dancing plagues show how desperately humans seek explanations for suffering. When people danced uncontrollably, medieval societies crafted narratives, spider bites, divine punishment, to make sense of the horror. Today we use different frameworks, but the impulse remains. We need stories that explain why bodies betray us. These outbreaks finally ended when science began challenging superstition. Microscopes revealed germs. Anatomy studies showed how nerves control muscles. But this shift started with simple observation, noting that old explanations didn't match what people actually experienced. The dancing plagues, for all their strangeness, helped push medicine toward evidence-based thinking. While Europe grappled with dancing plagues, another medical practice was quietly killing millions, not through hysteria, but through misguided science. For over 2,000 years, doctors bled patients to restore balance, unaware they were often hastening death instead of preventing it. For over 2,000 years, doctors performed the same basic procedure on nearly every patient who walked through their doors. They opened a vein and let blood flow out. This practice of bloodletting wasn't just common. It was the foundation of Western medicine across dozens of civilizations. The theory seemed logical enough. Too much blood caused disease, so removing some should restore balance. But this simple idea would lead to countless unnecessary deaths before medicine finally abandoned it. The practice traces back to ancient Egypt, where early medical texts describe bloodletting as treatment for various ailments. The Greeks later formalized the theory, connecting it to their concept of the four humours. Hippocrates believed health depended on balancing blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Galen expanded this idea in Roman times, creating elaborate rules about which veins to open for specific conditions. A headache, bleed from the forehead. Liver problems, open the right-hand vein. This system became medical dogma for centuries. Leeches were the precision tools of their day. Medieval physicians kept jars of these blood-sucking worms in their offices, applying them to exact spots on the body. Each leech could drink about 5 to 10 milliliters of blood before falling off. Doctors preferred them over knives for delicate areas like gums or eyelids. The most sought-after leeches came from Hungary, where collectors waded into ponds until the creatures attached to their legs. Apothecaries sold dried leeches as well. Patients could soak them in wine to revive them for use. The sheer volume of blood removed could shock modern observers. A typical treatment might drain 500,000 milliliters, equivalent to 1 or 2 full soda cans. Severe cases warranted more. Records show some patients receiving multiple bleedings over consecutive days until they fainted from blood loss. Physicians took this as a good sign, believing the body had finally reached proper balance. Patients who died were thought to have been too far gone for treatment, not victims of the procedure itself. George Washington's death stands as one of history's most infamous bloodletting cases. When the first president developed a severe throat infection in 1799, his doctors removed approximately 40% of his blood volume over 12 hours. They started with a standard pint, then took more when he didn't improve. By evening, Washington could barely speak from weakness. His last words likely came from blood loss as much as the infection. While the practice was standard at the time, this extreme treatment undoubtedly hastened his demise. Different cultures developed their own bloodletting traditions. Islamic physicians favored wet cupping, making small cuts, then applying heated cups to draw out blood. Mayan priests used stingray spines to pierce tongues and ears in religious bloodletting rituals. Traditional Chinese medicine employed a complex system of pressure points for limited blood removal. Despite differing methods, the underlying principle remained constant. Letting blood flow could restore health. The tools evolved but stayed brutal. Early bleeders used sharpened flints or bones. Greeks and Romans developed bronze lancets shaped like modern surgical knives. By the Middle Ages, barber surgeons, who performed most bloodletting, carried ornate folding fleams with multiple blades for different vein sizes. Spring-loaded lancets appeared in the 1700s, allowing quick, deep cuts with a trigger pull. Wealthy households kept personal bleeding kits alongside their dining silverware. Medical texts contained detailed bleeding charts showing where to cut for each condition. Headaches required temple veins, while gout needed incisions behind the knees. Some charts mapped over 40 bleeding points across the body. Timing mattered too. Physicians consulted astrological charts to determine the optimal days and hours for bloodletting. Certain zodiac signs were thought to govern specific body parts, adding another layer of complexity. Surprisingly, some patients survived thanks to bloodletting's placebo effect. Many illnesses resolve on their own given time. If someone improved after bleeding, credit went to the treatment. Doctors also noted that bloodletting sometimes reduced swelling or slowed rapid pulses, real effects from blood loss that they misinterpreted as healing. These occasional successes helped sustain the practice despite its many failures. The Renaissance brought early critics. Swiss physician Paracelsus ridiculed humoral theory in the 1500s, arguing that diseases localized in specific organs rather than floating in blood. A century later, English doctor William Harvey proved blood circulates, undermining the idea of stagnation causing illness. But tradition held strong. When King Charles II suffered a stroke in 1685, physicians still bled him excessively. Even Harvey's own colleagues dismissed his findings as irrelevant to their practice. Bloodletting briefly surged in popularity during the 1800s as medical schools doubled down on traditional teachings. Physicians prescribed it for everything from tuberculosis to mental illness. One French doctor, François Broussais, became infamous for his leechmania treatments, applying dozens of leeches simultaneously to fever patients. Parisian hospitals imported millions of leeches annually during this period, nearly wiping out native populations. The practice's collapse came suddenly, when science offered better explanations. Germ theory proved diseases came from external microbes, not internal imbalances. Statistics showed higher death rates in hospitals that bled patients aggressively. By 1900, most Western doctors abandoned routine bloodletting, though some rural areas clung to it for decades. The transition wasn't smooth. Many physicians resisted what they saw as an attack on centuries of established wisdom. Why did this harmful practice persist so long? The answers reveal much about medical history. Without autopsies or microscopes, doctors couldn't see how bleeding weakened patients. The humoral theory provided a complete, if wrong, explanation for health that resisted challenges. Professional pride played a role too. Generations of physicians had staked their reputations on bloodletting's effectiveness. Most importantly, medicine lacked systematic ways to test treatments until the modern era. Ironically, bloodletting has minor legitimate uses today. Doctors still perform therapeutic phlebotomy for a few blood disorders like hemochromatosis, iron overload. Leeches help with certain microsurgeries by maintaining blood flow to reattached body parts. But these rare, targeted applications bear little resemblance to the centuries of indiscriminate bleeding that defined earlier medicine. The story of bloodletting shows how even intelligent people can uphold harmful traditions. Galen and his followers weren't fools. They worked with the best knowledge available, but their failure to question assumptions had deadly consequences. Modern medicine still faces similar challenges when popular but unproven treatments gain traction. The real lesson isn't that past doctors were stupid, but that good medicine requires constant testing and willingness to abandon failed ideas. For all its faults, bloodletting represented an early attempt at systematic medicine. It replaced supernatural explanations with physical ones, however misguided. This shift toward natural causes paved the way for truly effective treatments once science developed proper tools. The centuries of suffering under bloodletting remind us how far medicine has come, and how careful we must be not to repeat similar mistakes with today's unproven fads. As bloodletting faded, another medical revolution was brewing, one that would finally explain what really causes disease. Microscopes were revealing a hidden world of organisms far smaller than anyone imagined, setting the stage for the greatest breakthrough in medical history, the germ theory that would dismantle millennia of mistaken ideas about health and illness. For thousands of years, doctors treated diseases without knowing what actually caused them. That changed in the 19th century when Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch peered through microscopes and discovered an invisible world teeming with life. What they saw would overturn centuries of medical tradition in just a few decades. Pasteur's experiments with fermentation proved microorganisms didn't spontaneously appear. They came from other microorganisms in the air. This simple observation destroyed the old idea that disease sprung from bad air or magical curses. When he showed that heating liquids killed these organisms, a process we now call pasteurization, it suggested a revolutionary idea. If microbes cause spoilage, maybe they also cause disease in humans. Koch took this further by identifying specific bacteria behind deadly illnesses. His methodical approach created what we now call Koch's postulates, 4 criteria to prove a microbe causes a disease. Using these rules, he linked anthrax to a rod-shaped bacterium and tuberculosis to another distinctive germ. For the first time, doctors had concrete proof that specific organisms cause specific diseases, not demons or imbalances. This new knowledge crashed against centuries of medical tradition. Many established physicians resisted germ theory at first. After all, it made their entire training obsolete overnight. Surgeons who took pride in their speed and technique now had to accept that invisible particles on their hands were killing patients, not bad luck or divine will. Some mocked the idea that creatures too small to see could bring down a grown man. The microscope changed everything. When doctors finally looked through these new lenses, they saw a universe of wriggling organisms in every drop of water and scrap of tissue. What medieval physicians called bad humors often turned out to be swarms of bacteria under magnification. Physicians who'd spent years learning to balance bodily fluids now had to study microbiology textbooks instead. Antibiotics turned theory into life-saving practice. Alexander Fleming's accidental discovery of penicillin in 1928 gave doctors their first magic bullet against bacterial infections. What had once meant certain death, a cut that turned red, pneumonia after childbirth, became treatable with an injection. By the 1940s, soldiers who would have died from infected wounds in previous wars walked home thanks to penicillin. Surgery transformed completely under germ theory. Before Lister introduced antiseptic techniques, you had better odds surviving the battlefield than the operating table. His use of carbolic acid to sterilize instruments and clean wounds slashed surgical death rates. What once took weeks of painful recovery with high infection risk became routine outpatient procedures. The same operations that killed people under medieval barber surgeons became survivable because someone finally understood germs. Vaccination showed the theory's true power. Smallpox had killed millions for centuries, with doctors trying everything from bloodletting to prayer. But Edward Jenner's discovery that cowpox exposure prevented infection led to the first vaccine. Later, scientists developed vaccines for polio, tetanus, and dozens more killers by applying germ theory principles. Diseases that once ravaged cities now survive only in laboratory freezers. Not everyone embraced the new ideas easily. Many rural healers kept practicing traditional medicine well into the 20th century. Some patients preferred familiar herbs and rituals over strange microscopic theories. Even today, you can find communities that interpret illness through spiritual lenses rather than bacterial ones, though vaccination rates show most recognize germ theory's value. The change affected more than just medicine. Public health measures like sewage systems and food safety regulations all stem from understanding germs. Cities that once blamed epidemics on divine wrath learned to test water supplies for contamination. Simple hand washing, once considered unnecessary, became standard practice once people understood how diseases spread. Mental health treatment lagged behind. While physical diseases gained biological explanations, conditions like depression and schizophrenia kept supernatural associations longer. Some asylum doctors still spoke of moral treatment decades after surgeons accepted germ theory. This split between mind and body medicine persists today, though neuroscience is finally bridging the gap. The pharmaceutical industry grew from these discoveries. Companies that once sold herbal remedies now produce standardized antibiotics and vaccines. Governments established agencies to test drug safety and effectiveness, a direct result of needing to regulate germ-fighting medications. The whole concept of clinical trials evolved from trying to prove which treatments actually worked against specific pathogens. Alternative medicine adapted awkwardly. Herbalists incorporated some germ theory, while keeping traditional ideas about energy and balance. Homeopathy arose as a strange hybrid, accepting that diseases had physical causes, but proposing mystical solutions. Even today's wellness trends often borrow scientific terms while rejecting core principles of evidence-based medicine. Developing countries felt the impact unevenly. Colonial doctors brought vaccines and sterilized instruments to some areas while ignoring traditional healers' knowledge. Some populations suffered when Western medicine dismissed their entire understanding of health. The best outcomes came when modern and traditional practitioners collaborated, combining germ theory with local health beliefs. Not all diseases yielded easily to the new approach. Viruses puzzled scientists for decades after bacteria were identified. Cancer resisted simple germ theory explanations until researchers understood genetic mutations. Chronic conditions like arthritis and heart disease required moving beyond infection models to study long-term bodily processes. The microscope kept revealing new layers. Electron microscopes showed viruses in the 1930s, proving some pathogens were far smaller than bacteria. Later technology let scientists watch immune cells attacking invaders in real time. What began with crude lenses magnifying pond water became a window into cellular warfare happening inside every patient. Medical education completely transformed. Students who once memorized Latin herb names now studied microbiology lab techniques. Textbooks that focused on balancing humors became filled with pathogen life cycles and antibiotic mechanisms. The ideal physician changed from a philosopher balancing bodily fluids to a scientist identifying and eliminating specific threats. Everyday life changed in unexpected ways. Food storage guidelines, cleaning product formulations, even personal grooming habits all adapted to germ awareness. People began expecting soap in public restrooms and expiration dates on packaging. The average person's understanding of hygiene today would seem like paranoid obsession to someone from the 1700s. Some old remedies turned out to have scientific merit after all. Herbs used for centuries sometimes contained natural antibiotics or antivirals. Honey poultices actually do fight infection, though not for the spiritual reasons medieval doctors believed. Even acupuncture shows measurable effects on inflammation, though not through mysterious energy channels. The transition wasn't perfect. Overuse of antibiotics created resistant superbugs. Some patients neglected traditional wisdom about rest and nutrition, while over-relying on medications. Doctors sometimes dismissed psychosomatic illnesses because they weren't caused by visible pathogens. The germ theory revolution solved old problems while creating new ones to address. Today's medical students learn about humoral theory as a historical curiosity. But the shift from spirits to germs didn't just change textbooks, it changed how we think about our bodies. People now assume diseases have natural causes that science can understand and address. That fundamental expectation of rationality in medicine may be germ theory's most lasting legacy, yet the old ideas linger in surprising ways. We still describe feeling out of sorts, a phrase from humoral theory. Some alternative medicines use updated versions of balancing bodily fluids. Even MDs sometimes refer to building up resistance to colds in terms that would make Galen smile. The language of medicine carries centuries of history in its metaphors. This revolution shows how science overtakes tradition not all at once, but piece by piece. First the microscopes, then the antibiotics, then the public health reforms. Each step faced resistance from those comfortable with old ways. But the proof became undeniable as lives were saved. The same pattern repeats today, with every medical breakthrough that challenges established beliefs. Looking back at demon theories and humoral balances seems absurd now, but we should remember that our ancestors weren't stupid. They worked with the best knowledge available. Their efforts to understand and heal, however misguided, paved the way for today's medicine. And just as we judge their errors, future doctors will doubtless shake their heads at some of our current practices. The real lesson isn't just about germs versus spirits. It's about how knowledge grows when people have the humility to question what they know and the courage to accept evidence over tradition. That's what let medicine move from guessing to science and what keeps pushing it forward today. As remarkable as these changes were, they all stem from one profound shift: seeing disease not as punishment or imbalance, but as a natural process we can understand and influence. That simple but powerful idea changed everything from operating rooms to kitchen sinks, proving that sometimes the smallest discoveries have the biggest impacts. Looking back at leeches, mummies, and drilled skulls, it's tempting to judge our ancestors harshly. But would we have known better in their shoes? These bizarre cures show human ingenuity, desperately fighting sickness with the limited knowledge available. Each failed treatment, each strange remedy, was a step closer to real medical understanding. Next time you take an aspirin for a headache, remember, it exists because generations kept searching for answers, even through terrible mistakes. Modern medicine didn't appear overnight, but grew slowly from centuries of trial and error. We're still building on that long tradition today, hopefully making fewer mistakes than those who came before us. The fight against disease continues, just with better tools now.